The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 13th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to Jesus, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." He said to them, "Go and tell that fox for me. Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I will finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please have a seat. Here we are in the second Sunday in Lent, on our Lenten journey with Jesus. In the past weeks, we talked about Lent being a season of honesty about our sins, a time of truth-telling about the many ways that we fall short to God's goodness, a season of repentance and lament, we say. But today when we think about times where we mourn, usually the response is when somebody dies or when we experience the loss of a loved one. Most of us never weep, except on funerals, except on occasions when we deeply feel sad about a loss. I've heard that back in the days, in the story of the church, there used to be inside churches something that they called a mourner's bench. I don't know if you've heard of it, anything like that. A mourner's bench was a place, a pew in the church, where mourners, where repentant sinners would come and sit to think about their sins. They would sit there and they would weep and they would mourn for the many ways that they've had fallen short on God's love. Today we mostly mourn for the loss of a family member, of a close friend, but it is very uncommon that we would mourn or feel grief for the sins that we do against God. Today, I would like to ask you, what causes you joy? What moves you to laugh with delight? Is it watching your favorite TV show or your favorite movie saga like Star Wars or something? Is it sports? Does it make you feel joyful when your favorite team wins on the weekend or gets to be the champion at the end of the season? Is it something more similar to drama? Like stories of the young man who overcome all the obstacles and ended up being with the women he loved, and lived happily ever after. Is it that what makes you joyful? There's many people who say that you can tell a great deal about people based on what they consider to be funny, good, or delightful. But the converse is true also, you know? The other question would be, what causes you grief? What is something that moves you to tears? Some examples. When your favorite baseball team makes it to the playoffs and ends up matching against the Dodgers. That's grief. When you don't get the favorite job that you knew it was the right fit for you and you don't get it. That hurts. That's painful. The loss of a loved one because of death or distance. You know, what makes you feel grief and fall to tears? You know, joy, laugh, and delight are good indicators of what we love, what we value. But grief, tears, lament, I wonder if grief, tears, and lament are also indicators of what we value the most, of what we truly cherish, of those people that we truly cherish. You know, some of you have met my dad on the past months. My dad comes from a very humble place in the state of Sonora. He was born on what is traditionally known as a ranch, small community far away from a big city. And my dad had a strong heart, probably, relationship with my grandpa. I remember that my dad used to tell us that my grandpa was so strict, and when it came to respect and to obligations, that when my dad was 14 years old, my dad found the courage to come and bring the issue to my grandpa about the need of buying a new pair of shoes. So my dad went and asked my grandpa, you know, I need a new pair of shoes. My grandpa's response was, oh, you really need a pair of shoes? Well, you should probably go and find a job, so you can buy yourself a pair of shoes. My dad moved probably by a feeling of proving himself, or my grandpa didn't move out of his parents' house, moved into the northern part of Mexico, Mexicali actually, where he had a cousin, and he started looking for a job there, so he could buy himself a pair of shoes. He didn't just do that, but he also got a job, brought my mom over, and got married with her, and my family started settling at Mexicali. Despite that story, my mom always moved my dad to not be resentful of my grandpa, but on the contrary, to be thankful for him. My dad would always take me and my brothers at least once a year to visit my grandpa and my grandma, and he would always call them on the phone. My dad never distanced himself with my grandpa. He always looked for him. And the more money my dad was able to have, the more money was he willing to give both of my grandparents until the moment of their death. I remember that day when my grandpa died. We went over to the memorial and everything, and I would say that was the first time I saw my dad just weeping, just crying, just not having control of what he was feeling. I knew that my dad had some distance with my grandpa. I knew that story of brokenness, you may say. But you know, I wondered. I really found my dad's tears to be quite revealing to me. I wondered when I saw my dad cry, if that was because of a genuine sense of loss from my dad, like whether he really loved him so much, more to the point that I would even think of, or if there was a sense of regret on my dad. That my dad was probably feeling a little sad of what might have been the relationship with my grandpa that never was. The what ifs that my dad would have considered when he decided to leave to the north. You know, all this brings us to now. In today's gospel reading, we hear about a Jesus that we're not quite sure if it actually broke down and cried in today's reading. You know, what I do know is that other gospel writers talk about this same story, and it was not Luke. Luke never told us that Jesus cried. He just says that Jesus laments over the state of Jerusalem. It was actually Matthew who told us in his story that Jesus wept over Jerusalem. But when we hear those words that we heard in today's gospel reading, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often have I desired to gather you as children, together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. I mean, to be really honest with you, I find it very hard to imagine Jesus saying those words without having tears, without crying. It is revealing that Jesus was on the road in Galilee, far, far from away from Jerusalem. But he knew that already the storm was gathering. He knew that there was some problem in the horizon. And we can see that because we're told that many Pharisees started telling Jesus, you know, Herod, that powerful guy, the most powerful guy in Galilee, is out to kill you. But Jesus brushes that off easily by naming Herod a fox. You know, Jesus, then we're told after this that Jesus falls into a deep moment of lament, of grief, of mourning. Not because of Herod's plans, not because of what was coming. Jesus knew what his fate was in Jerusalem, but over the fate of Jerusalem itself. You know, Jesus speaks a little bit about the prophets in today's gospel reading. And we know who the prophets were, right? The prophets were spokespersons to God. People, human beings just like you and me, but they were given an unusual insight into God's purposes, into God's plans. And a very consistent message that we hear the prophets in the Old Testament share was reminding the people of Israel about how they were delivered out of this slavery in Egypt, in the ways God had made them a great people. And despite that, despite how much God did for them, you have squandered your inheritance. You've broken that covenant between you and God. The prophets were also people very courageous because they were willing to share, to call the powerful into account, to call them out when they were abusing of power. Prophets would call and would put into account kings, high priests, those people who were abusing the most vulnerable, the powerless. So I was wondering, as I was reading today's gospel, I was wondering if Jesus had the prophets in mind when he was weeping. If he was thinking about all those people, if he was lamenting about thinking, what if? What if Jerusalem would have listened to them? What if these people would have treated them with respect and listened to them instead of looking into their own desires? What if they would follow God's insight? Lent, as we said earlier, has traditionally been the season of repentance. And the church gives us 40 days to mourn all the ways that we have disappointed ourselves, all the ways that we have fallen short, the ways that we've lived, those things that we have done, and the ones that we have left undone. And you know, when we can do this when we look into the state of our lives. We can do this when we can see into the state of our nation, into the state of the world, what's happening today in the world. I mean, in 40 days, there's a lot to mourn we can figure out for sure. But today's gospel lesson is not about our grief and our lament, but it's about Jesus who looked at Jerusalem and wept. He had come together all to himself, like the mother hen reaches out to its chicks and brings them together. And yet, we have responded to that open-handed love with cries of crucify him, kill him, King of the Jews. I'm not going to do a list of lamentations on ways that we have fallen short. But what I do want to do this morning, what I do want to invite you, is to take some time right now. Take some time and ponder. If Jesus thought about our town today, if Jesus thought about our town, would he rejoice about how faithful we've been? Or would he lament? Would he lament if he would see into our church today? Would he rejoice about our faithfulness, or would he lament? If he would see into our own lives, same question. Would he rejoice or would he lament? You have rejected those prophetic truth tellers who dare to call you to account and to tell you the truth. And now, the time of tears, Lent. I was figuring out how to sweeten this up, happy ending, some might say. And I was wondering, we're in the middle of Lent, the season of mourning and grief. Probably there shouldn't be a happy ending. But there is. There is, because despite of our shortcoming, despite of the many ways that we stumble, we hear of a God. We hear of the love of a God that in the same way the mother hen stretches its wings over his chicks to protect them and to expose herself. We hear of a God that through Jesus himself, Jesus Christ, extended his arms on the cross for each one of us. Friends, The happy ending is that you are beloved. You and I have a God whose love never fails, whose love goes all the way to the cross. As we recognize those things that we grieve, those things that brings us to tears, may we recognize the eternal and never-ending love of a God who's always there for us. Thanks be to God.